Come on, we want to welcome you here. It is great to be joining you. It is awesome as Courageous Church Charleston to be joining our family all over the world for the very first time, broadcasting out. Yeah, come on. We're excited here. We're excited about what God is doing in our city, in our church, but we are pumped for what God is doing in our movement. Freedom Church Cape Town, we cannot wait to come and visit you later this year. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. But we as a leadership team, one of the things we do every single January is we seek God for vision for the year to come. I don't know about you, but I'm a New Year guy. I love the New Year season. There is something about the opportunity of resetting. There is something about the opportunity of getting vision for the year to come that I absolutely love. And what we do as a leadership team, we seek God and we say, God, what are you speaking to us about? What is, the overriding theme of the year to come? And honestly, 2024 was incredible. Here in Courageous, we launched. We're just 10 months old. We've seen literally hundreds of people coming in and starting to call our church home. We've seen many people getting saved and getting baptized. Even over the Christmas break, we had a bunch of engagements as well. Babies born, like the life of the church is growing. But honestly, as a leadership team, we're like, man, what can we really see happen in 2025? Because it was one of the most significant years, 2024. And God said to us, already you're starting to limit me. Already you're starting to limit me. He said, I actually believe that 2025 is limitless. 2025 in God is limitless. And that's what we're going to be talking about throughout January. And how do we step into that? Because I don't know about you, I'm a New Year kind of guy. I love it. I make New Year's resolutions. Hands up if you've made some New Year's resolutions. Come on. You know when in church, it's like, should I put my hand up? If you did, put your hand up. Did you make a New Year's resolution? Okay, be honest with me. All around the world, who by January 5th has already failed on the New Year's resolutions? I have already. I think I failed on January 3rd. And, I have this strange mix. I get really excited at this season of New Year because there is this sense of potential, this sense of new, this sense of opportunity. And yet, on January 1st, I'm exactly the same guy I was as December 31st. Anybody else with me? And in reality, you and I are actually limited. Are we not? We have a finite amount of time. We have a finite amount of resources. We have a finite amount of capacity. And I don't know about you, but sometimes in this season, there can also be a little bit of cynicism in me because I tried before, but maybe it didn't quite turn out the way it was. But God wants us to lock in this January, not in the limitlessness of you or me, but actually the limitless of Him in you and me. We've been talking about this scripture, and I love it. If you've been around church, you may have heard it before, but this is amazing. Ephesians 3, verse 20. Now to Him, that's God, not Dave Thomas, not you, I'm afraid. You are normal, you are average. Well, you're above average, anyway, but here we go. Now to Him, God, who is able to do, read this with me, church, immeasurably more. Just pause on that a second. What does immeasurably mean? You can't measure it. It's unquantifiable. And it's not that He can do immeasurably stuff, it's immeasurably more than we can ask or even imagine according to His power. The reality is that I know there's even some of us who are in church around the world today, perhaps for the first time in a few months, maybe even the first time in a few years, because there's something within you crying out, this needs to be different. But the reality is, if we don't get God center of everything we do this year, I hate to say it, but just like me, you're probably going to have a repeat of 2024. But instead, we're going to lock in because the reality is your 2024 is limited, but God's isn't. Yeah. And in actual fact, in Him, we can see more than we ask, dream, dare to imagine. It truly can be limitless. And so as we kick off this year, what we're looking at is expanding our vision, dreaming bigger, thinking and asking God what is in His heart for your life this year. Because I really believe, genuinely deep down, it is truly, potentially limitless. But today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about a principle that if you start to discover it and you start to practice it, it will start to unlock some of the limitlessness of God in you. Did you realize that there are things that God has actually wired inside of you? There are principles and ideas and characteristics that he's actually put inside of you, but sometimes we don't know it's there. In fact, there are certain things that God's put inside of you that are even miraculous, that have a capacity and a power to unlock things that you can't even think or imagine. And today I want to bring this to our church all over the world because this word has been in my heart the last 4 or 5 weeks as I've been praying about 2025 for Courageous Church, for Saz and our family, for our church all over the world. And I think this is the thing that God wants us to lock in on and learn to discover, and it is the law of multiplication. Because the reality is, and you're going to follow with me, this is going to kind of make more and more sense as we walk through because there's a little bit of a different concept. But actually, the limitlessness of God is actually locked up in the power of multiplying. And we see this even right in the very first book, in the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. It's a picture of God creating and making the world and wiring us together. And there's so much in it. And yes, it raises questions and different things like that. But ultimately, we discover something of who God is, his character, his nature, his power. And in verse 22, we see this very first time that God brings up this idea of multiplying. And he speaks to all of the world and create. And he says this, he says, be fruitful and, say it with me, church, multiply. He doesn't say be fruitful and grow. You see, there's a big difference between multiplication and growth. Growth is when you make an existing thing larger, greater, or bigger. Multiplication is when you birth something new. And it's actually part of God's design. The reality is that for most of us, our New Year resolutions, they were about growing probably in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's, I want my business to grow this year. I want my profit margins to increase this year. I want maybe my family to grow. I want maybe my waistline to grow a little smaller. I don't know what it is, you know. So much of our New Year's resolutions, they're about growth, whereas actually multiplication is something different. And there's a power and a secret that we can unlock that's actually already inside of you. Because multiplication is part of God's design. It's actually right at the heart of how he even wired this incredible world that we live together, and even you yourself. And I want to help you see it and unpack it. Because I'm not like a super big nature guy. I've got friends that, they just can't stay inside too long. Saz is one of them. If she hasn't gotten out of the house by 9 a.m., we're going to have issues. I've got to get out. I've got to see the sun. I've got to get out. I've got to get some fresh air. My buddy Mason loves it. Some of us, we're just wired for it. But there are moments when we get out into the world around us that we see things that actually reveal part of who God is. Have you ever had those moments when you get up to the top of the mountain that you're hiking, that you look down and you just go, wow. Suddenly you realize how small you are. Anybody ever had that? When suddenly you realize, maybe I'm not the center of the universe like I felt this morning when that thing went wrong. Maybe I'm not everybody's enemy and it's all about me. I am a speck in this picture. Or maybe that moment you see the sun rise and there is that reality that there is a fresh day, fresh chance, fresh opportunity. In fact, the Bible puts it like this in Psalm 19. I love it. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. The crack of thunder, reminding us that there is a power beyond us. The beauty of a sunrise, reminding us that there's greater things than perhaps what we're focusing on. They speak of God himself. They have no speech, no words, no sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. So we're going to look at something that God reveals even through Genesis 1 about the law of multiplication and actually how we can live in it. You ready? You with us, church? Let's jump in to Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And this moment isn't just talking about the nothingness. It's actually speaking about the brooding potential. The stuff you can't see yet, but is already there. This is what 2025 is like. There's stuff you can't see yet. And if you look back just to 2024 to try and start imagining what might be in 2025, you're probably going to miss it. Because actually God, the Holy Spirit, is brooding with more. He's brooding with more. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And woof, in comes life and light. And God saw that the light was good. And I want you to note this word. And he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Let's keep going. Ready? There was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So that God made the vault and separated the water from the one that was above. Called it sky and called it morning. And then again, he says this, let the water under the sky be gathered, separated from the land. And he let dry ground appear. The first way we start to live a life of multiplication is we've got to realize that we're being taught here through Genesis 1 is that actually there comes a time where God separates. He parts the sea. He separates sky from land, land from water, night from day. And what is he doing ultimately? He's creating space. Ultimately, the first step to a limitless life, a limitless potential in 2025 is starting this year with the principle of creating space for God. But the problem is when we live a grow mentality, we don't want to create space. We kind of want to keep it the way it was. We want more of what we've got rather than risking it to experience something we've never experienced. You know, in the end of 2022, Saz and I and our 4 kids moved to Charleston off the back of a extremely fast turnaround with our visa. We left the country in about 9 weeks. We condensed our entire world into 18 boxes, got on a plane and moved here. And what was really interesting is that, you know, we're probably in our late 30s at that time. We actually were starting to, hear this right, starting to kind of like peak in life. We'd bought our dream home. You know, we were senior leaders of a worldwide international movement, arguably like a platform that we could grow. We actually started to have savings. You know you're an adult when that happens. It's like, oh, I haven't seen the overdraft for a little while. Adulting, great. Right, we had a great community, we had friends, we found purpose. Saz was launching a podcast and a business. And actually, coming into that season, we could have just lived to grow what we already had. We could have just lived to grow what we already had. But God said, no, I actually want you to live for multiplication. And we jumped on a plane and we separated out. We had a space that was created in the hope and faith that maybe God might do something that only he could get the glory for. You see, limitlessness takes risk. Limitless creating space takes getting out of your comfort zone and into somewhere different. But here's the mind-blowing thing. It's hardwired into you. Did you know, a little bit of a biology lesson, don't worry, we're not going to get too into it. But there was a mom and a dad and, they came together, contributed one piece each. And you were at one point one cell. At your conception, that's who you are. And that cell just grew and grew. No, it didn't. What actually happened is that cell split. It's called the process of mitosis. And it went from 1 to 2 and 2 to 4 and 4 to 8 and 8 to 16 and 16 to 32. You did not just grow. In fact, the very principle that we see in Genesis 1 is in your DNA. Yes. You were multiplied even before you breathed your first breath of fresh air. It's literally wired in you. And in fact, the power of multiplication is key to your life. Yeah. Because if your cells don't replicate, it's hard to heal. And actually, when you get injured and you have sickness, the power of it working, because God has wired it into you as a message to your life. Yeah. Do you know that aging is just the process of that cell division slowing down and being less effective? Did you know that things like... We got somebody going, uh-oh. Did you know that things like sickness and cancer specifically, is actually the manipulated process of mitosis, where unhealthy cells replicate. You see, I think in that kind of leaves us with this picture that this year across the world, in every one of our churches and locations, you have a choice of three things. You can choose to be a person that lives to multiply the God things in your life, even if it costs you, even if it takes you, even if it's a risk, or you can just try and keep hold of what you have, but the problem is that you sign its death certificate because it's just going to age. Or you can let the things that are unhealthy for you multiply in your life. You see, the limitless power of God is actually woven into the very fabric of your humanity, your biology, your existence, because there was a message from God to us. But in order to create space, what you and I are going to have to do this year is we're going to have to allow the God gaps. Yeah. Think about it, 2022, we step out of our amazing life and home and security with family and friendship. And I'm not saying this for any credit for us. I'm just giving you an example of it. And we divided, we separated, we stepped into nothingness. And when the day we actually landed on the ground, we knew 2 people in this city. And then that expanded to 3 when we met our incredible realtor, Michelle, who was absolutely a hero to us, right? And honestly, we moved with nothing, but we moved with the hope that God could do something. That actually there was something more in his ability to multiply than our capacity to grow. And just 10 months into our church, we celebrate last year at the end with our serve team party, 70 people in our house, not just servers on a church serve team, but family, friendship, marriages coming in, children being born, people meeting Jesus, life and hope being found, people discovering their calling. But the reality is none of that existed in 2022, but it was possible. Yeah, it was. It was there, hovering over the darkness. But we don't like to let the God gaps in. I don't know. Go to church every week? Give up that? I prefer to keep hold, thanks. I'm gonna grow this in my own strength. Because the reality is when you let God create space and you create space for God, he does something really powerful. Look at this. He fills that space with life. Yeah. Look at this in Genesis chapter 1. Let's jump back in. You ready? Then God said, let the land produce vegetation. So he creates the gap between water and land. And what's he do? He fills it with life. He fills it with these seed-bearing plants on the land that they may bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. In the sky, he fills it with stars that sign to mark sacred times. And in the water, look at this. I love this. It says, let the water teem with living creatures. So many of us are trying to live in the fullness of God without trying to be willing to make space for him. And we wonder why we're not experiencing the abundance of God. And I'm not talking about the abundance of God in your bank account. I'm talking about the abundance of God in life and life in all its fullness. I'm talking about the abundance of God in the peace that you have when you know he's in control. The abundance of God when you know the joy that you have when you put him first. You see, we've got to create this space for God because God only fills the space we make. Yeah. And God in his grace will at times move, but let me just tell you something true and real. And if you grasp it this year, it will change things. If you make space for God, he will always fill it with life. Yeah. Might not be what you expected. May not even be what you wanted. I didn't want to move here originally. It's not because Charleston's not lovely. I thought God was saying something else. But as we stepped out, the abundance of life, people I know are going to be friends for life with for the rest of my days. People I know I'm going to see go and do incredible things for Christ. Or I could have just stayed and growed. Or we can multiply. You see, God creates space. He fills it with life and then he blesses it. Yeah. Oh, look at this in Genesis 1. It says, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, increase in number. You know, it's really interesting. In sort of the English language, we very limited. And I always make the joke that, you can use the word love and say, I love Doritos and I love my children. And they're kind of two different statements, but we lack a little bit. In the word blessing, we so often miss what God really means when it comes to blessing. Because the word for blessing here in the Hebrew is barakah. And actually, it's not a descriptive word, it's an active word. See, we think when somebody says, I'm blessed, it's a description of the state of life that you have. Oh, they're blessed. Why? Because they got a new car. Oh, they're blessed. Why? Because, he got the girl. Oh, they're blessed because they got to go to the state championship game. I don't know, whatever it is. But actually, the word for blessing here is much, much, much more powerful. It actually means to infuse into those things the ability to multiply. To bless is to give part of God's only creating power into his creation. It's to bless is to impart. That's why you and I are accountable for what we do with our lives. Because in you is infused that same power of God. So when you think about it, what does he do? He divides, he creates space. He fills it with life, stars, sea, sun, sky, every beautiful thing that you can imagine, every piece of wonder in the world. Then he blesses it. He literally gives it the power to go. And he says, now go thrive, go live, go love, go enjoy, go take communion. I just love it. This is the heart of God. But the image of God we've created is, I'm going to take from you. Going to live in a small world, in a small life. Don't do this, don't do that, don't go there, don't go that. And yet in Genesis 1, we see the generosity, the limitless nature of God. But me at least, often live the opposite. Instead of actually creating space, I contain. Anybody else? Anybody willing to acknowledge their issues with control? Yeah. I wasn't asking for hands up, but good job, And if you looked at them, we contain. But when you try and contain, you actually reduce. You actually put a lifespan on it immediately. It starts to age within seconds. This is why churches die. Because churches grow and they get to a point where everybody likes it the way it is. I like those songs in this building and that pastor that way. Oh, yeah, let's just grow this. And it grows and it grows and it gets to a point, but then at some point it starts to decay because it stopped multiplying. Wow. It wanted to hold on to something that was, and I'm not talking about changing our faith or misinterpreting scripture. There is truth and only one truth, and that's the way of it. But I'm talking about the ability to grow and evolve and change in the way we do things. And actually it reduces things because in other words, it ends up cursed rather than blessed. And cursed is not some kind of like crazy weird thing that you kind of come under. It's just the opposite of being blessed. And then what we try and keep, we actually lose. It's powerful. The limitless potential of 2025 is wrapped up in embracing the God dynamic of who you are. So as we start to land the plane and bring this message in, I want to give you 4 things that you can start doing tomorrow, literally, well, not even tomorrow, today. Start right now. Do it over here we have barbecue, so I apologize to every other location that doesn't live in such a great place. Go get some barbecue and start practicing this right now, or some fried chicken. I don't know what you're going to go for, right? But I'm going to give you 4 things that you can start doing and you can practice this year to start living a life of multiplication. The first one is this. You've got to have a vision beyond you. You've got to have a desire for things that are more than just about your pleasure, your preferences, your gains, your more. And even more than your own family and your own interests. You've got to have a vision that goes beyond you. If Saz and I only were interested in ourselves, we would have never got on that plane. You've got to have vision beyond you. You've got to have a vision that actually lives for something beyond yourself. Because the reality is, isn't it, our New Year's resolutions, I said it already, they're about us. I want to have that job that pays twice, because I'll give it away. No, you won't. The number of times I've met people, I just want to be generous. You're either generous now in your lack or you will never be an abundance either. Trust me. Trust me. You got to have a vision that goes beyond you. Who else are you going to live for this year? Whose gain, whose blessing, whose peace, whose love, whose hope are you going to live for? Even in the context of church, I want to sort of, turn it a little bit here. For some of us, we come to church to get what we want. And the idea of maybe jumping in and serving, it's not really for me because church is about me and what I need. And there are seasons in our life where we need that, but who are you going to live for this year? Who are you going to sacrifice time for? Where are you going to go beyond for somebody else? Because it multiplies something bigger than you can imagine. The second thing is, and our senior pastor talks about this all the time, you got to start to think generationally.
Let's go.
You got to start to think generation. You know what? You may not be a parent, and this isn't about being a parent. This is literally all about saying this. Who behind me in some way, shape, or form in life, doesn't even necessarily need to be an age, can I give a hand up to in this season? Who or what do I need to do with what I have, my resources, my time, my knowledge to raise somebody else up? What do I need to give away? What do I need to plan? What do I need to put in place for the things beyond me? Do you know wealth never goes past the third generation that inherit it? And this is it, because they only give on wealth rather than a generational mentality. You got to think generation. What about, even in the context of church, I'm excited about Courageous. We're going to grow this year. I believe we're going to double. I believe we're going to fill this place over and over. I believe God has things in his heart for our church and all of our locations around the world that we can't even imagine. But here's the real thing. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 4 years from now, 50 years from now, we're writing a legacy now for them.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
In the UK, we have a few buildings that are a little bit older than our oldest buildings here in the US. Do you know that they would often start planting the trees 150 years before they would use them? It means that potentially 3 generations of people would never see the thing they were investing their life in. But the things they invested their life in still stand today.
Wow, let's go.
You've got to think generationally. You got to have a vision that's beyond you. Thirdly, you got to practice letting go. You got to practice letting go.
Yeah.
Let me tell you now, Saz and I would never have stepped on that plane 2 years ago if we hadn't, for the 15, 16, 17 years of our marriage prior, just practice letting go. Let go of this, let go of that. It might be career and job and money, but you know what I think for a lot of us? You need to let go some attitudes this year. Some of us have vision, but we're not going to let go of the attitude that you are a failure and that defines you. You got to let it go, otherwise it's going to die. You got to practice letting go. What about making this year a year where you drop offense quickly? What about making this year a year where you let go of burdens quickly? What about making this year the year that when you trip up or mess up, you get up right and go again?
Yeah.
You got to practice letting go. And finally, if you want to live a limitless life of multiplication, you got to take some risks and you got to create some space. And this is probably really where it starts and comes back. And I wanted to full circle it to this because I want to ask you this today. What's the one risk you're going to take this week? I'm not necessarily talking about skydiving, but if that is what you want to do, feel free, give it a go. What's the risk? You're going to take the risk on Courageous Church and come back? You're going to take the risk on plugging in and getting involved in community as we open up more spaces and groups at the end of this month, or jump in and serve perhaps when you never have before? You're going to take the risk on believing again in God? Are you going to take the risk on community? You're going to take the risk on trusting? Because last time you did, you got hurt. And I'm not saying that wasn't real or true, but it's holding you back. What are you going to take a risk on this year? You're going to take the risk to go across the coffee shop and invite somebody to church? You're going to take the risk of walking across the coffee shop and asking somebody on a date? Do it the right way. You're You've got to create space, and it will always demand risk. I will never forget the moment I turned to Saz on the plane out of London on October 19th, 2022. Our 4 kids sat between us, and I looked at her and I said, we have to be okay with this potentially failing. We looked at each other and we said, I'm in. So I'd rather risk it and try. And here we are, just at the beginning of what God is going to do.
Yeah, let's go.
What is in your 2025 that God is calling you, drawing you? Because I believe, despite all of your best effort, your 2025 is limited. But God's in you is not. So let's pursue Him together. I'm going to hand over to all of our pastors and leaders around the world, and I'm going to lead you in a moment of prayer and response. I want to encourage you to pause in this moment and think through what God is saying to you and make this a moment of commitment and change and transformation. It's been great to join you, church. We can't wait to see what God is going to do in your church, your location, all around the world this year.